Hey everyone, welcome back to the Equipping ELLs Podcast. Before we dive into today's episode, I just wanted to give you a brief overview of our brand new series that's going to set you up for success in this upcoming school year. So whether you're enjoying a well-deserved summer break or you're already thinking ahead to the next school year, this series is all about helping you feel confident and prepared. No stress, no overwhelm. In this upcoming series, we are going to be talking about what to prioritize now at the end of the year or during the summer so that you can walk into the school year with a solid foundation and a clear plan. I know you're tired. I know there's a lot going on. I know you want to just close this year, go into summer, and you'll deal with things when you start back next year. But I promise this is one of the best times that you can stop, reflect on this last year that you've had while it's still alive in your mind, while it's still you're in it, and really think about the things you want to prioritize for next year. So that's what this upcoming series is going to be all about. We're going to be talking about things like prioritizing those family connections or prioritizing trauma-informed practices, prioritizing student portfolios, digital ones that are easy to set up and implement, prioritizing how to really understand and learn about what your Spanish speakers and how they learn, what they need from you when it comes to literacy. And then lastly, prioritizing different instructional and lesson planning methods. We have some incredible guests that are going to be joining us over these next couple weeks and sharing their expertise with you so you can start to at least get your mind churning about what you're going to be focusing on now to make next year even better. Because here's what I really believe. When you have a solid foundation for the school year, when these are the cornerstones that you set up for success, ensure that your classroom is not just a place for academic learning, but a space where your students feel safe, valued, and supported. That's why I've chosen these topics as what to focus on and prioritize. Even if you just take one episode and you go deeper on it, it is going to impact your school year next year. So when you start the school year with these priorities already in place, you'll be equipped to handle anything that comes your way, and you'll be able to make a lasting impact on your students' growth and development. So let's dive in to today's episode. I am so excited to introduce our guest to you today, Nawal Qarooni. Nawal is a Jersey City-based educator, writer, and adjunct professor who brings a holistic approach to literacy instruction. She works with schools across the country, helping teachers create meaningful, authentic learning experiences for their students. As a mother, the proud daughter of immigrants, and an inquiry-based leader, Nawal's teaching philosophy centers around the valuable lessons families bring to children's education every single day. She's also the author of Nourishing Caregiver Collaborations, Elevating Home Experiences and Classroom Practices for Collective Care. We'll be putting a link in that in the show notes, so you will definitely want to get your hands on that. In her book, Nawal invites us to move beyond school-centric, one-off events to create more authentic, engaging collaborations with caregivers. Rather than asking what families can do to support schools, Nawal explores how schools can identify and celebrate the rich literacy practices families already bring to their children's learning. By centering this work in holistic teaching, a mindset that values the whole child through compassionate collective care, Nawal highlights critical literacy tenets like the power of collaboration, the importance of observational literacy, and the role of talk in connecting ideas and people. This episode is part of our series about what to prioritize now at the end of the school year as you go into summer, as you have a little bit more space and time to think and process, to really set ourselves up for a successful year next year. And I think all of us can agree. Anyone who's worked with students knows that the family connections are a foundational piece to our student success. However, we don't always know what that looks like in practice. So I can't wait to dive in and hear more from you, Nawal, on how we can prioritize these crucial connections in our classrooms and schools. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for that introduction and for having me.
Absolutely. You have, I mean, this is an area that I feel like is not talked about enough and needs to be talked about more and more. And I love just your look and view of really kind of flipping it on its head, that it's not what can families do for us, but it's how can we really bring in what they already have, the beautiful cultural diversity that is in our schools. I always encourage educators that I talk to, like, just stop and think for a minute. What an incredible opportunity we have to teach the global classroom right in your neighborhood. That is awesome. So I can't wait to share how can we bring those families into and really create incredible environments where everyone can soar and thrive. So I'd love to start with you just sharing a little bit more about your background and what led you to your current work in literacy and family engagement.
So I was a newspaper journalist before I was a teacher, and I moved into teaching through New York City Teaching Fellows. I was a classroom teacher for many years, both in Brooklyn and in Chicago. So the populations that I served were extremely diverse, lots of different languages spoken. And then I moved into a literacy coaching role. It was not until the pandemic, when I had 4 kids of my own at home and I was coaching teachers on Zoom, and I had my own children nursing and in different stations trying to do their schoolwork, that I realized that all families were doing the same work that literacy educators were attempting to achieve in the classroom. That
Mm,
families, just by us looking into their spaces, watching them interact with their kids, hearing them talk in any and all languages with their children, problem solving in the background, etc., that they were actually caregiving and educating was synonymous.
mm,
And so I kind of came up with this thesis and this premise, and at the same time was tasked with designing a family literacy engagement program for Chicago Public Schools. And so the synergy of those two, kind of living and experiencing it, plus interviewing schools that were going to get an influx of funding to determine how to best use the funds to bring in families, really kind of jived to bring my book and this current kind of like center of gravity to the fore.
mm. I love that so much. I love that. Yeah, just those few pieces kind of became this catalyst of something probably greater than you probably thought back then. And I love that you had your news reporting skills, because those are probably really key in doing the research to figure, really go deep on this topic.
I bring it up just as also this, I think like the importance of being able to talk to all kinds of people was something I learned as a newspaper journalist, and to have this unapologetic positive regard for all families and lives and ways of being, that like we had a privilege and we had the opportunity to see inside people's homes,
Mm,
see in people's spaces, to see how families were interacting with their kids in these kind of everyday moments that we don't have the chance to do as classroom teachers regularly. And
yeah.
so the interviewing lens, this lens of I am going to see into your life, but I'm going to share it in this kind of really, really reverent way, has
Mm.
to be kind of like the filter through which we do all of our teaching.
Absolutely. That's what an honor to get to do that, and a privilege and a responsibility, right? To really get to go into people's homes and see a different look and share that. But how empowering for teachers to get to have a glimpse into the work you've done, because like you said, it's really one-sided in what we see. And I found so many teachers, made assumptions on what's happening at home, or what's, why the parents aren't involved. And just was constant, like, let's stop, let's not assume, let's ask and engage and do what we can on a positive place, and assuming the best and doing what we can. So I love that so much, that you were able to really just start there and see what's going on in the homes where our students feel the most themselves. So what inspired you to focus from all of this, kind of probably so many different paths you could go on as you did your research and had your experience, and these things kind of collided. What inspired you to focus on the cultural capital of families as a key component of literacy? Because I think that's something we don't usually make that connection. So tell us about that.
Well, I'm a firm believer that literacy is not just words on a page, and literacy is not just alphabetic text. I am because my family is. And I basically tracked my own language and literacy development and realized quite quickly that my own literacy trajectory, I'm a Farsi speaker. I understand a lot of Arabic. I understand a little bit of French and can speak French, right? Like these experiences spun separately than my path of education in the school building. And
Mm.
I realized that my language and literacy development was actually not from school, but instead from my family and from my like authentic experiences outside of school. And so I really want to turn on its head the idea that education happens solely in buildings and education happens solely in schools. And then I started kind of just digging into what Dr. Lewis Mall's research calls the funds of knowledge. What kinds of learning, literacy and otherwise, are we getting from our families outside of school? And we know that there's not, a direct correlation solely between academic skills and books on a shelf. We know that it's also familial knowledge, medicinal knowledge, um, you know, cooking and carpentry and
Yeah.
all kinds of storytelling lore and tradition and ritual, and there's so much more that families teach. And if you kind of expand your definition of literacy, then you will always go back to the family, because the family can, without even realizing, and has for millennia, no matter what their socioeconomic background is, they've been doing this. They've been growing their children's literacy skills. You see families of all kinds speaking in different languages to their children, narrating their world, saying, there's the bus and there's the bird, and talking out loud and singing songs and singing lyrics. And these are all things that we don't need to tell families how to do. They do it. They do it naturally. And so all families are doing literacy practices already. So that's why I focus on the family. And then when you think about families as our partners, there are just more teachers, as opposed to families as an other. Let us tell families also, as they are an additional like burden. When you eliminate the barrier and you imagine that families are like truly your partners, then you just have more teachers extended beyond classrooms. So that's
Wow.
why family.
What a paradigm shift. I want everyone to hear that I just feel like there's so many thoughts going through my mind of what you just shared that really flip all of that on its head. And we get a lot of questions of just how do I teach an ELL to read? They're not getting it. They're not getting it. And just exactly what you said. I think of so often like, I grew up in an English speaking home. So of course when I went into school, those things were familiar. I had the background, I had the words. It was an easy thing to learn to read. And what I feel like we're trying to do is we're taking students who are growing up in homes that have such beautiful richness, but different. And then we're trying to say, here, but you need to read these books about this topic. I don't know about this, and so just we're missing that disconnect that actually would help literacy of just like what you're saying of learning to read as well in English. If we can bring in that beautiful diversity of what they already have been learning the last 5-6 years at home, what conversations have been happening, what stories have been told from their culture, what celebrations have they been having that they have that background.
That's right.
Because I just feel I see this all the time of like we're not going to go there. They need to understand this when they have no background, they have no vocabulary, but they need to learn to read it. And it's just such a disconnect when we can really bringing those things together is really where they're going to flourish is what you've found, I'm sure.
And what you could also say, you could look at it another way visually, is if you're thinking that historically schools have told from a top down to the family, this is what you must do to in your child's academic life. This is what you must do to grow readers and writers.
Mm.
I changed that completely. So wipe that and instead put the strength up top with the families. And it's all around listening, honoring, getting to know them, building confidence in what they're already doing. You're bringing
Mm.
that into the classroom, because then what will happen is they already have background knowledge. They feel more confidence. They know their identities. They feel socially and emotionally connected to you and to their families. Their families know what we're trying to achieve because we've talked to them. And then you're bringing it back up in a circle of collective care so that instructional promise grows. So if you instead start with families. Or you look at your curriculum across the year and you ask yourself, does this lend itself to a family connection or collaboration? And then I can explain the different kinds of ways that we connect with families. But if you do that across your calendar year, you are much more likely to have partners in your families, as opposed to our definition, narrowly defined, of what makes an engaged family,
Mm,
which often has a ton of bias and often has a ton of kind of our own issues and or, preconceived notions around what
yeah,
makes an engaged family.
absolutely. Yeah, let's go deeper into that. So let's say a teacher's looking at their year plan.
Mhm.
Let's walk through what that looks like of how can they really find those opportunities for that collaboration and bringing our fellow partners and teachers of the families into the classroom and into the school.
So we can think about the smallest level ask and we can think about like a larger ask or a larger collaboration on a very kind of like minor level, and something that should be done for all families and all schools should be to really get to know families and to know what their dreams are for their child and what merits success for them and what cultural markers or rituals or holidays they want to have celebrated across the year, or what languages are spoken at home, what texts are important to them in their lives, and define text really widely. Also videos and also song and also story. Like in my family, we used to watch this ridiculous movie, a made for TV movie about Nadia Comaneci.
Ah,
Uh,
yes, I loved her. I was a big gymnast, so.
on the First Perfect Done Right. So the made for TV movie is not entirely appropriate about her life. I love it, but there's some messaging there that is interesting. And my mom recorded it on VHS when the Disney Channel was like, free for 48 hours on our TV. And we watched that movie on repeat. And so that is a text that like I can recall. There's a lot of sayings and mantras and lines that my entire family, including my siblings, know. So that is like something that would be like interesting for a teacher to know about me, because it's something she could channel, mention, or like serve me better if she knew that about me,
Mm,
right? So I have in my book all of these types of questions that we can ask families that to really get to know them. Like, what inspires wonder and awe in your child? And what are authentic and everyday ways that you engage in reading, writing, storytelling, reading the world, meaning like looking at things and talking about it, and or writing thank you letters, signs,
yeah.
emails, do you belong to a spiritual community, that kind of thing. If we don't know those things about families, we can't start. The other piece of work at the very beginning of the year, I think, that has to be done is kind of unpacking your own biases around how families should look, sound, and act. And so I like to do some like at least reflection time, and I beg all administrators to give teachers time to do this, to think like what constitutes a family for you, and like
Mm,
close your eyes and really think of it. Like, whose voices are you hearing? Is it in a certain place that you imagine family to be? Is it your chosen family? Are they blood relatives? Is there trauma connected to it? Like, what comes up for you? And then talk to a colleague and talk
mm,
to another colleague, because I'm absolutely sure that you're going to have different definitions of what family is. So we want to make sure that like we're representing families really widely in our in the text that we're using in the classroom, no matter what the curriculum is that we're using. But then the invitations are things like, if you're starting a unit or if you're ending a unit, is there a place where you can ask families to collaborate in some way with their child? Is there a place where kids can turn and ask their families what they would have done in that position, or what they experience similarly or different? Let's say you're writing expert writing. What could a family member be an expert on and write a how to about? Like, you have to think about your unit, and then where are the natural places where you can invite families? And that kind of ask can be like something that you send home. Some kids are going to get responses, and right, some kids are not. But I think like the highest on that spectrum is what I call the family lab sites, which I just returned from California schools, a week of doing it. I do these cycles where we invite families into the classroom to share a literacy experience with their children, and it's connected to curriculum. So like if they are starting a new personal narrative unit, they will do the brainstorming with their parent. And it will be something like, let's draw memories of a special place. And then they will talk about all the memories that happened there. And then I explain to families that you just engaged in the writing process. Here's the writing process, and here's how you can continue that work when you're at home. Or if we're at the beginning of a reading unit where we're making inferences and we are trying to, you know, or evidence from the text and we're really trying to like build analysis. I'll do it with a visual literacy. So I'll show a piece of art when families come in and I'll have them build analysis around, why do you think that? So the girl in the picture seems really sad. Why do you think that? That's evidence from the text. Here are the reasons why. The tone of this piece is dark. It seems sad. What makes it sad? That's evidence from the text. Turn and talk with your partner. The partner is always the family. And then we're explaining academically what they're trying to achieve. So, what this does is break down the barrier between home and school in the reverse direction, making it so that families know what we're trying to achieve, but then giving them tips for how they can easily extend it into their lives in any language. And I'm really careful that the work that we're doing in the classroom works for all languages, and I'm encouraging that all languages are being spoken and said, because visuals even the playing field, because there's no family that can't engage in drawing, looking, and talking. I always have a translator when I do those family lab sites. It's also in the structure of a mini lesson, so it's like a gradual release of responsibility. I say that really plainly. We try it for different times a day to see who can come. We invite different ages. It could be intergenerational. Siblings can come from other parts of the school. Babies are usually there, like on my hip. So there are all different ways for how we can invite families into the fold, but we just constantly want to think across the calendar year for what are all the different ways. So it's not just tackling family collaborations in one way. It's not just we do a literacy night and we've done family engagement.
Yep. We're not just checking off that we got that one night a year done. I'm just picturing of how affirming that must be to those students who feel that constant pull of the in between, of living in one language at school and living in another language at home. And there's a lot of separation. So I just love that idea of picturing a student with their mom brainstorming about a topic that they're going to be doing, and just how I can't imagine how affirming that is, that this is part of my learning. This is accepted. This is welcomed. This is honored. Do you allow parents in that brainstorming time to be using their native language as they collaborate?
Oh, I don't allow, I encourage. Yeah, and I say it right away that there's no perfect, there's no one way this needs to look. It can be in all and I mean, I was just in a school in Walnut, California, in Southern California, and I had a Mandarin translator, but there were Spanish speaking students in there. There were, some were English. There was like one Farsi speaker. It was so, it was eclectic. It was full of sound. And then the other thing is really making sure that families know that there's no right and wrong, because families have to learn their own education and their own experiences as well, based on where they went to school, based on their own relationship with formal education, right? And so you do see a lot of family members like sounding out letters and looking at their phones for translation. And I have to go and kind of soft coach in and do a lot of, no, it's okay, stretch out the sounds, let your child try themselves. This can look this way or this way or this way. Brainstorm messily. We're at the beginning of the writing process. Like I do a lot of soft coaching based on which partnership sounds like they need what. I take no notes in family lab sites because this is not like I'm not grading, but it is really beautiful data collection. And when we think about data and the kinds of data available to us for families and students, like we want to think really widely about all strengths. So I might just jot down a couple things that I noticed about a family's interactions, whether it was like around perfectionism, or that way I can continue to kind of like softly coach the children and softly coach. It's another way to know how to better serve our families. But I like to do this. I like to do this activity periodically, which is take a piece of paper and put it in 3 columns and write down the names of kids who you know a little bit about. And then in the middle, what do you know about them? And what do you want to know, right? It's kind of like a KWL chart, but so what are you trying to learn about them? And often our biases come up in what we think we know about families because our brains are trying to fill in the blank about, why we think somebody doesn't show up or why we think children look the way they do, whatever it might be. This is like the natural tendency of our minds. And the way that I find that we can know more about families is in the Family Lab site, because in these ways, all these personal stories come up, all these kind of like happenings and noticings that they're willing to share in these kind of like intimate classroom settings where I'm showing how human I am, because I always model using my own children and I model using, my own flaws and my own pictures. I do this one called photo elicitation where I bring up a family photo and I ask a lot of questions about who's outside the frame, who took it, why do I think so? Like I ask a ton of questions, and it's a lab site about building curiosity and asking lots of questions and how we can cultivate, lots and lots of questions about the world around us. And so families share about themselves. They bring in their own family photos and they share about themselves. And in those moments, I learn so much about families, and that's data for how I can better serve them. And they then better know how human I am and trust me with their children more. So they become my partners more.
Wow, I love that. And I think sometimes we underestimate just also that coaching piece with families because of we don't know what their education looked like. Education if they went to school outside. I know here in Panama is very, very different than inside the US. And so just like, that perfectionism or that breaking those things down and really coaching the families, bringing them in. And then I love that you also give them opportunities to continue those things at home and that you're truly building a partnership with those families and really seeing them as teachers, which is a beautiful shift in mindsets, right? I love how many things you're dismantling in your work that you're doing. I know so many questions about native language in the classroom and all these things. And I feel like just in these sessions, you're just showing the beauty at work of that collaboration. So let's talk about, there's so many misconceptions flying around, right? About what to do, just people who I think if they just don't feel comfortable, they haven't had the experience and they start to place their ideas. And we all, like you're saying, our brain just tries to fill in pieces that we don't understand. And usually that's in a biased based place that it's coming from. And so let's talk about some misconceptions about multilingual families and literacy development that you would like to dispel. What are the main ones you're seeing that you're just, flipping it on its head? I know we've shared a few already, but if you have, maybe one or two more that you've just seen like, nope, that's not it. This is really the beauty at work here.
I've been surprised recently with how often I need to share what translanguaging is. And so when that happens, when I need to make sure that both families and teachers in a school know that translanguaging and using your full repertoire of language skills, intermittently, interspersedly, toggling between words, using any word that comes to mind, both in writing and in storytelling and speaking, I make sure to design a lab site around it. I make sure to show examples of picture books and or stories that have toggling back and forth between different languages. A misconception is that families cannot support their children in school settings because they don't have full mastery of English. They don't need full mastery of English. They don't need full mastery of any language. In fact, my mother speaks a hodgepodge of several languages and she communicates just fine. She teaches me a ton. She teaches my children a ton. Because my dad was one of 7 kids and all 7 left before the Iranian Revolution and all married Europeans or Americans, all with different languages. I have cousins and aunts in Europe who are Iranian and Dutch, who are Iranian and Danish, who are Iranian and Swedish. They all speak a little bit of Spanish, a little bit of Swedish, a little bit of Dutch, right? A little bit of Arabic, a little bit of Farsi. They speak all different kinds of languages. And when they speak, we don't know what's going to come up, right? But that doesn't mean that we have to make sure that we know that that's like rich literacy.
Yep.
I think a misconception is that kids who cannot write are unable to storytell. And that's also one that like quickly can get debunked when you hand that child a mic or when you record them. Oral rehearsal and saying the story out loud is still a valid form of storytelling and a form of pre-writing, as is drawing. Drawing is a form of pre-writing and it's a form of storytelling. And we know that it's a valid form of storytelling, period, in the form of graphic novels and wordless picture books. Um,
I mean, we've gone through so many already today, and I think this conversation is going to be something that my listeners are going to think and process and reflect on. As there's been a lot you've shared that just really kind of flip what our education system looks like on its head, and there's better ways we can do the things we're doing. Let's talk about, you talk about the importance of storytelling within families, and really, as we've all grown up in different families and different cultures, that's a huge piece of just family history and cultural, um, significance is through storytelling. So how do tell us about how storytelling contributes to literacy development? And then also, on to that, what are some practical ways that teachers can really bring more of a storytelling piece into the classroom and really providing that space for students to share their stories?
I mean, everything starts with story. Storytelling builds empathy. Storytelling helps us make sense of the world. Storytelling is kind of like a child's blueprint for the way that life can go or life should go. Stories happen in all languages and cultures. That once upon a time, Yekibud, Yekinabud, that phrase goes in every historical context, in every cultural background for as far as we can ever see and count. And so what families often don't recognize is that storytelling is building language growth and is building literacy development, and it's building your child's critical thinking and the ability to kind of navigate alphabetic text when they're met
Mm.
with it in the classroom.
Mm.
Similarly, when we teach and talk about emotional literacy and reading how someone looks on their face, there's research to show that kids can then better analyze character and emotionality in text. And so if we draw those parallels for families, I think we're doing them a service. I also think it's like a massive, massive privilege to be able to springboard family storytelling so that we can kind of archive, encapsulate, and memory keep for families. Because what happens is those stories go away if families don't feel equipped to talk about what happened in an old photo, who took the photo, who's outside of the frame, what feelings were evoked in those moments. And I write about this in my book. When my aunt was dying of colon cancer, super fast during the pandemic, I had the opportunity to go see her just right when she died, right before she died. And I will never forget that the one gift that she gave me, it was this the last album that was standing because my family stuff was ruined in the Iran-Iraq war. So we had no black and white photos. I always lament when I see people's artifacts from their lives because I don't have any of that because it was all destroyed. But there were some black and white photographs of my mom's life when she was a child, and I got to sit with my aunt and ask her every single question that I wanted, that I never would have had the chance to do. And so if we can, as classroom teachers, pave the way for that kind of storytelling about either our children's cultural identities, their backgrounds, where they came from, etc., there is research to show that more confidence is built when you know your kind of history and where you stand. And I just think that kind of work, in quotes, comes authentically to most families. And so to say to them, this is also academic, to say to them, this is also very important for your child's development, will validate what they've already done in any language.
Mm. Yeah. And I think that's where, there's dismantling in the classroom that's happening, but there's also so many things that we're pushing on to parents that I think, whether it's subconsciously, but I just saw so many families come in and feel like, oh, we have to speak English at home, even if the parents don't speak English. Okay, no more reading. And I kept saying, no, please, keep reading in your native language, keep speaking in your native language. That is a huge and crucial and important piece to your student, to your child's learning. We don't want you to only don't do English at home. Let keep up your native language. And it was a lot of that coaching of the parents, affirming that this is your role in this, and it's a really purposeful and important and vital role to your child. So I love that, of just sharing with the families, the things you're already doing, keep doing those things, are really academic and important in their development of language.
Yeah. And You can do things like you asked what can teachers do. You can do things like look at your assignments and see what lends itself to family storytelling. So if you're doing something like a family tree, instead do something more wide, like a constellation of care or a community garden, or who are the people who help shape you and grow you, and then have work around that so that families are constantly contributing to this. So for example, write thank you letters to the people on your garden or to one or two people, have an interview 2 months later or a month later with somebody there, and like help the family orchestrate some of those questions and record that conversation so that like additional work can come of identity, and storytelling can come from that, right? I like to have something that I build across time in my schools where I've been working for several years so that they can see the artifacts of the family collaborations, so that they can see that change is happening in like a very tangible way. Um, yeah.
Mm. Well, and I think, a huge piece of this, why we all get into education, is to help our students. And I think that this is such important work as teachers to create those spaces where we are helping our students really have those conversations with their families, have those, asking those questions, just going deeper. I know I worked at an international school here in Panama, and we had students from all around the world. Most of the parents were from 2 different countries, multiple languages going on. And when I was working with first graders, a lot of them had a really hard time of where did they identify. They're living, third culture kids.
Yeah.
So there's just a lot of confusion when especially younger students of like, where is my identity, a cultural identity, and a lot of that is with conversations with their parents that they get to talk about, and really where they feel most at home and relate to. And so I always loved having those opportunities for students to share kind of where they felt most alive, or where, like, my kids, they think they're Panamanian. They're like, I'm Panamanian, I'm not American, and so it's just, I love it. Like, where do you feel at home? Where do you feel most connected to the culture? And so having that conversation in the school with the parents and the students, I think can be really such a powerful way to help our students feel more confident in who they are. And then they can bring that into the classroom in such a rich way. But it does take some of that work to do.
What you would really love, I think, is this text lineage language story that I do,
Mhm.
which is I do it with both teachers and with families, where we basically are like visually creating. And I have a whole list of questions. One of them is like, who do you feel most at home with? Where do you feel most at home? Who makes you really feel seen? Like, where are the places, the people, and the kind of spaces that shaped your language and literacy? Whose voices did you first hear? And they make a collage of people, places, like album covers, movies, right? And I share mine, and I like say across time all the different ways that language and literacy was developed. And what that does is expand the definition of literacy for families and really validate everything that they're doing. And you learn so much about the kids. And then you can keep going back to that to either revise. You can have a text lineage for your classroom
Mhm.
space, read alouds that you're reading, and see all the different places. Like, you can do a variety of things with it, but I think that's something you would probably
I
love.
love that. I love that idea so much. We're running out of time here, Nawal, but I want to just thank you so much for the time you've taken to be with us today. And I mean, you've shared so many just really practical ideas, but just a lot of the flipping things on their head. And that's what I want to encourage everyone to think about as they go into the summer, as you have time and space to think about what can this really look like in your classroom with your students. Doing this work will impact your students in powerful ways, and the families and yourself as well. I think that's kind of what I'm sure you've seen, I've experienced as well, is the more I try to show it for my students, but really it changes me as a person, as an educator, and makes me be able to show up better. So please share with us where my listeners can find out more about you. If they want to have you, the work you're doing, let us know.
Thank you so much. You can find me on my website at nqcliteracy.org, on Instagram at nqarooni, Qarooni, and all the other socials as NQC Literacy.
Amazing. And we will also link your book that they can get a hold of. And if they're, interested in finding out more, I think you do things with schools and other amazing work that you're doing. Again, thank you so much, Nawal. And this has been such a pleasure to have you today.
Of course. Thank you, Beth.
Absolutely. And we will link all those in the show notes. So if you're driving and can't write that down, don't worry. You can get a link and find out more about Nawal there. So All right. Have a great day. Thanks, Nawal.
You too. Bye.